Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zaka Jacob. External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar today stuck it to Rahul Gandhi on his claim that India is afraid of China and that our soldiers are getting beat there at the LAC. He said it was not Rahul Gandhi who sent the troops there, it was Narendra Modi. This, according to the External Affairs Minister, is the largest peacetime deployment at the line of actual control. The Congress is saying that the minister is conveniently obfuscating the issue. After all, Rahul Gandhi is in the opposition. It's not his job to be sending the troops. It is the party in power that has to be doing that. It's going to be 3 years this summer when China unilaterally changed the status quo. The question we're asking, and we'll have a full panel here on Brass Tacks, the question we're asking is, are we any closer to resolving this standard?
There is a phrase, war by other means. There is also, think of it, this is politics by another means.
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar questioning the timing of the BBC documentary on Prime Minister Modi and the criticism of American billionaire George Soros.
There's a surge of reports and, attention and views. Were some of these things not happening earlier? I gave you the example of Assam.
Yeah.
People speak about, you had to make a documentary. Many things happened in Delhi in 1984. Why didn't we see a documentary on that? So come on, you think the timing is accidental? Let me tell you one thing. I don't know if election season has started in India and Delhi or not, but for sure it has started in London and New York. I was very clearly with what is called.
Jaishankar said the motive behind such stories abroad was to spread an anti-India agenda.
Just like I told you, this drip, 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 how do you shape a very extremist image of India, of the government, of the BJP, of the Prime Minister? Look, this is a globalized world. People take that politics abroad. Politics of India doesn't stop at its borders. Sometimes politics of India doesn't even originate in its borders. It comes from outside.
The minister also hit back at Congress MP Rahul Gandhi, who has been targeting the Modi government over China's aggression at the LAC.
If I were to sum up the China thing, please do not, buy this whole, I would say, again, I use this word, this narrative that somewhere government is on the defensive, somewhere we are being accommodative. I ask people, if we were being accommodative, who sent the Indian army to the LAC? Rahul Gandhi didn't send them. Narendra Modi sent them.
So is there a deliberate anti-India agenda being raked up in the run-up to the 2024 Lok Sabha elections?
All right, we'll open this up to our full panel tonight on Brass Tacks. We'll be joined in a moment by Tuin Sinha of the BJP and Supresh Srinath of the Congress. Smita Prakash, editor ANI, to whom Dr. Jaishankar gave that podcast. She's joining us on the broadcast this evening. Professor Brahma Chalayan, strategic affairs expert, and Professor Victor Gao is chair professor at the Suzhou University and a former Chinese diplomat. Smita Prakash, let me start with you first. I'll start with the China part, where the External Affairs Minister said that, it's not Rahul Gandhi who sent the troops to the LAC. It is the government. It is Narendra Modi who sent the troops to the LAC. But are we any closer to knowing, through the course of your podcast, are we any closer to knowing from the EAM or from government as to why China changed the status quo, and why is it that after 16 rounds of Corps Commander talks, the status quo ante as it existed pre-April 2020, we've not been able to go back to?
Well, I think, when he said about Rahul Gandhi, that bit was because it was a question which was intended to provoke, to find out whether the BJP is on the back foot or not, as far as the opposition making these allegations that they are not, that they are squeamish about, saying anything on China. Because what I asked him was that why doesn't the Prime Minister say China? Why don't you say China? To which he responded in that manner. As far as whether we are whether India and China at any point of time right now are they placed to resolve the conflict? I don't think so. Because the impression that I got out of after the interview was that we are fortifying our positions out there. China is doing their bit, and there seems to be some kind of a stagnation as far as the talks are concerned. I did ask him as to why do we keep our side of the bargain every time and China doesn't seem to do it. To which he replied, but that's how countries do. That India has signed agreements with China before, and that has resulted in decades of peace.
Okay.
And India is not one to break those agreements. And he listed them out, and he said it's not necessary that those agreements were signed under which regime, but government of India, regardless of which political power was in place, they signed it, and it's up to the country's mature democracies to keep to the agreements that they have signed.
Okay, so let me ask Rupriya Srinath. Time and again, Rahul Gandhi in Parliament and outside has said that the Prime Minister is afraid of China, the External Affairs Minister is afraid of China, they don't take the name of China. You heard that podcast with Smita Prakash. The External Affairs Minister not only did take the name of China, but he also said, and he attacked your leader by saying it's not Rahul Gandhi who sent the troops to the LAC, it is Narendra Modi. And this, according to him, is the largest peacetime deployment of the military at the line of actual control. Net, what he's essentially saying is if the government of India is matching China troop for troop in defending every inch of our territory, then what would Rahul Gandhi have?
You know, quite frankly, I heard that podcast, and with all due respect to Smitaji here, I think the External Affairs Minister sounds childish, churlish and immature. And I don't expect the highest diplomat in this country to sound the way he does. He almost sounds petulant, he almost sounds trollish. And I'll tell you why. When he makes this boisterous statement about the Prime Minister sending the troops and not Rahul Gandhi, obviously he will, because he is the Prime Minister and he is taking the calls, being in government. I mean, what a silly statement to make to begin with. But I actually want to show the mirror to the External Affairs Minister, because he chooses to troll people on social media. And instead of talking about substantive issues, I want to ask him, too bad you're doing what you're doing with China. Why are we not being able to restore status quo ante April 2020? That is the question that people want to ask. 36 months into the crisis, we still do not have status quo ante. We've converted large parts of our patrolling points into buffer zones. Who's going to be responsible for that? And may I dare also say to India's External Affairs Minister, who of course called Sushma Swaraj names according to Pompeo's book, against which the External Affairs Minister, by the way, has taken no objection and has not moved court, not sued him. Forget about that. But I would like to ask the External Affairs Minister only one question. What has your diplomacy resulted in? Because according to your own government, whatever happens in India is happening due to an international conspiracy. What the hell are you doing in job then?
Okay.
Because if international conspiracy is furthering issues in India, what exactly are you doing in office? Where is diplomacy? I would really want to ask him that
Okay,
question.
I'll come to the international conspiracy
to
parts in just 1 second. So let Tuin Sinha respond on the China bit. I mean, essentially, isn't the External Affairs Minister being a bit disingenuous when he says Rahul Gandhi did not send the troops to the LAC? It's Narendra Modi. Of course it is Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi is in power, not Rahul Gandhi. The question that is being asked again and again is, you have sent the troops, at least in 2 of the 7 places where there was this eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation. At least in 2 of those places, the status quo ante as it existed pre-2020 is not happening. Depsang and Demchok. It is now a new normal there. What are you doing to change that? What are you doing to impose costs on China? What are you doing to push the Chinese back to pre-April 2020 position? That's the question that's being asked by the Congress and other opposition parties. Tuin.
Good evening, Zaka. The point which External Affairs Minister was simply making is that Rahul Gandhi's unnatural awe of China put India in an uncomfortable position. And that he gave an example of that as recently as in May 2002, when Rahul Gandhi was in England. He made a comment praising China and saying that, China has been offering prosperity to all countries. He said that at a time when China had wreaked havoc upon the world, he was basically endorsing that diplomacy. So when External Affairs Minister specifically mentioned how we have stood up to China, he was basically calling out Rahul Gandhi's chicanery throughout the China episode. And so, status quo that you have just asked, see, that is work in progress. Fact is that we have stood up to China in a way that no previous government had done, and that is reflected in the scale of border infrastructure creation, which is unprecedented. We have a 3,488 kilometer border with China, but right from Ladakh to Arunachal, if you look at the infrastructure creation, that has prevented many further incursions which would have anyway taken place, which were very commonplace during the UPA era. We have they have initiated a slew of PLI schemes which are eventually going to take away China's manufacturing progress. That again is going to improve progress. In fact, the Quad group initiated by us was very clearly an attempt to restrain or to restrict China's expansionist tendencies. In fact, the Prime Minister has on so many occasions spoke about expansionist forces. Who else was he referring? So if the Congress does not have basic IQ or common sense to understand.
Let me go to Professor Brahma Chalani and Professor Victor Gao as well. Brahma Chalani, let me ask you this. You know, one of the things that the External Affairs Minister said in that podcast is that the amount of money that's being spent on infrastructure development in the border areas has gone up 5 times in the last 5 years. Now, admittedly, India may have been slow in catching up to the pace of construction of border infrastructure. Obviously, the Chinese have had a head start to it. But his contention is, particularly in the last few years, India has been matching China road for road, infrastructure for infrastructure. Does that cut ice with you? And I want to come back to this whole, fundamental question that there were 7 places where there were friction points. In 5 of those 7, at least disengagement has begun and happened. But in 2 of those places, even disengagement has not begun or happened. 16 rounds of talks. Is this going to be the new normal, or are we still hopeful that there will be a return to status quo ante as it existed pre-2020?
Shaka, China's April 2020 stealthy land grabs in Ladakh were not the first time India was caught napping by a foe. But to forestall another nasty surprise, India should at least have an open debate on why it was taken unawares. Unfortunately, there's no debate in India on China. There's no debate in Parliament. There's no debate even in the Indian press on China. The fact is that India-China relations have fallen to their lowest level in decades, with no end in sight to the prolonged military standoff between the two countries. In fact, the opposite is happening. You have seen how Xi Jinping's Lunar New Year inspection of PLA's combat readiness against India indicates how involved he is personally in the Himalayan military confrontation. In fact, not content with the major military standoffs in Ladakh, China in recent weeks has built up offensive new forces along the Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim borders and in occupied Doklam. So despite the brutal Himalayan winter, China has deployed thousands of additional PLA troops along the border of Arunachal Pradesh, and thousands more near India's so-called chicken neck. So we focus on Ladakh, but the entire border is becoming hot. And in fact, the risks of escalation are growing. So there needs to be a debate. There needs to be why we were taken unawares by the April 2020 Chinese land grabs. There needs to be a debate also about accountability. For example, not a single army commander was relieved of command, despite what happened in April 2020. So in a way, what we see, this back and forth between Rahul Gandhi and Jaishankar, in a way is good because at least we're having some sort of a debate on the border situation.
So let me go to Professor Victor Gao. The issue here, Professor Gao, is the India-China border flare-up has not happened in isolation. China, since Xi Jinping took office in 2012, has been very consciously and very deliberately sort of pushing the envelope with a whole bunch of its neighbors, whether it is with the Philippines for the Scarborough Shoal and the Paracel Islands, with Vietnam, they're having territorial disputes, with Japan, of course, everybody knows the Diaoyu, Senkaku Island disputes. There are a whole bunch of countries, and Taiwan, of course, I don't even want to go into Taiwan. We all know what is going on vis-a-vis Taiwan. So in all of this, the common factor is one, and that is that it is China that is making the first move to unilaterally change the status quo. And that is what it is doing in the border with India as well.
With due respect, allow me to emphasize this is completely untrue to the realities. You know for sure that China has 14 land neighboring countries. China has already signed border treaties with 12 of them. Only 2 countries have not signed border treaties with China, India and Bhutan. Therefore, China does have a solid track record of signing border treaties with its land neighboring countries, especially with India. And I'm truly convinced that once China and India can sign border treaty, China-Bhutan land border treaty will definitely be signed. Now,
Professor, I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but what about maritime disputes?
Yeah,
those are still very much active.
For the maritime disputes, allow me to emphasize one point. By 1945, when Japan unconditionally surrendered to China and to the United States, Japan was sitting on all the islands, isles, reefs, atolls in the South China Sea. Then Japan surrendered all these islands, atolls, reefs in the South China Sea to whom? To China, with the consent and the support of whom? Of the United States. At that time, there was no Vietnam, there was no Malaysia, there was no Philippines. All these countries were colonies. And they achieved independence much later than 1945. Therefore, if you really do some historical homework, you will know China regained control of all the islands, atolls, and reefs in the South China Sea in 1945 as a result of victory against fascist Japan.
I'm not sure that that's how the historical facts bear themselves out. As far as I know, a lot of these islands had been given to the United States, including, of course, in the Philippines and Vietnam, etc. But anyway, be that as it may, I want to come back to the second part of what the External Affairs Minister said, and this was about this recent controversies involving George Soros, the BBC documentary. So let me ask Smita Prakash this. Is the minister convinced, is everyone in government convinced that there are forces outside this country that are out to get them, that want to peddle, according to them, a false narrative that India has become an intolerant country, Mr. Modi's government is intolerant towards minorities, so on and so forth? And the criticism is that, in a year like the G20 year, when India is supposed to be this big power, it's going to be a coming-of-age year for India, if you're going to respond to every brick bat, that doesn't make you look like a big power, that makes you look like a petulant one.
Zaka, before I come to the question, I think Supriya ji said that Dr. Jaishankar is the topmost diplomat. He isn't. The topmost diplomat is the Foreign Secretary, which Dr. Jaishankar was. He retired, then joined the Modi cabinet, and much later joined the BJP, which makes him a politician, a complete politician, who's an external affairs minister and has diplomatic duties, but not the topmost diplomat of the country. Little bit of a change. The other thing which I agree with what Professor Chalani said, that there is a fog of war when it comes to China. That's always been the case, if I'm not mistaken. Professor Chalani knows better. Because, India has always been open and awkward, not so open and awkward when it comes to China. And I think that comes from the loss of war, because loss in war with China. And I think when it comes to talking openly, Dr. Jaishankar did speak about it. But, yes, I agree with Dr. Chalani that no open punishment as such seems to have happened for 2020. But when I believe gaming for a conflict has been happening, it's a work in progress, and more so since 2020. Now, as far as the Soros allegations, the BBC documentary, the Hindenburg thing, I did ask Dr. Jaishankar, and I did ask him this very thing, that does he agree with this and banning that? Doesn't it look awkward? As far as he is concerned, and as far as the BJP is concerned, and there's no difference between the two, he is quite clear that this is like what you say, war by other means. This is politics by other means, and it's not coincidental that there are these documentaries and reports and things which are happening. Now, you and I might think that it is overreaction, and the Congress certainly would think that it is overreaction, but the BJP believes that it is a well thought out strategy, and that that politics is being played outside the geographical boundaries and being used by echo chambers within the country.
Okay, so let me ask Supriya Srinath this. This is what the External Affairs Minister said. You've heard of the phrase war by other means. This is politics by other means. Do you think the timing of all of these attacks are accidental? There are forces who have realized that they cannot dislodge the Narendra Modi government through democratic or electoral means. Now they are resorting to undemocratic and non-electoral means. This is what the BJP, the External Affairs Minister, the Prime Minister, they firmly believe so, whether or not you like it. And again, even in your party, the first reaction after Mr. Soros's comments was from the head of your media cell, who said that we don't need a Soros to change the government in this country. That depends on the opposition, and that depends on the people of India. Some other leaders in your party seem to have taken a different stand. My question is simple. Shouldn't we take a very commonsensical approach to what is being perceived as an interference by an outsider in the Indian democratic process?
So when Standard Chartered, Credit Suisse and Citigroup say they will not accept Adani bonds, when indices like Dow Jones and S&P throw out the Adani stocks from their sustainability index, when the UK regulator decides to probe both Elara Capital and Adani, when the Norwegian pension fund decides to sell its stake in the Adani group, what should we say?
No, that's a private company. That's a private. I'm not talking about the private company.
Let me please finish.
Yeah.
Let me please finish.
Sure, go ahead.
These are all reactions to a very serious case of misgovernance, a very serious case where allegations of a web of shell companies through which perhaps Benami money is being floated into India in a group which has monopoly positions in ports, airports, food, agriculture, renewable energy, cement and whatnot. The government doesn't seem to care about any of these allegations. The government doesn't even seem to be remotely interested in finding out if there are indeed shell companies of Benami money. My point on this is different. You can be jingoistic, you can be xenophobic, I couldn't care less. But let us not put our democracy to shame. We have institutions, we have a democratic culture, resort to that. And if BBC indeed was something that you wanted to tackle with, especially at a time when you want to be the Vishwaguru and doing all the G20 tamasha, please let me ask you a question. What did you do through the diplomatic channel? And is Jaishankar not a failed minister not to be able to do anything? And is Mr. Jaishankar not a failed minister that India, after the crisis in Galwan Valley, where 20 of our brave hearts lost their life, India went ahead and increased our trade with China many-fold. Today, China is our largest trading partner for the last 3 years, and we have a trade deficit with China to the tune of $100 billion. We are almost funding China to do what they're doing at the border.
So let Tuhin respond to that. My limited intervention was, the set of allegations against a private company is separate from the allegations of interference in India's democracy. Those are two separate things. But Tuhin, please respond.
But the private company enjoys extremely...
Supriya,
1 second.
Yeah.
Dhaka, the private company enjoys extremely close ties with India's Prime Minister.
Of course.
And one of the reasons why the private company is going scot-free is his allegiance to the Prime Minister.
Those allegations need to be...
and supporting him.
Those allegations need to be probed on merit. I'm not disputing that. But that's not the same as meddling with India's internal democracy. But Tuhin, on the question that she asked, which is a fair one to ask, I mean, we had Galwan 2020, 20 of our soldiers died, and yet the 22-23 trade with China is 130 billion. It's the highest that we have with any country.
Insofar as the trade deficit is concerned, it's a temporary phenomenon because many a times there are backlogs which get reflected in the present year. But with the slew of PLI schemes which have come up, eventually you will see China being the worst sufferer of our initiatives. Now, let me also answer the specific charges being made against Adani. Now, Adani Group is competent to answer that. But if the Congress has any morality left in it, first they should scrap all the orders, all the contracts, or at least review all the contracts given to the Adani Group by Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan government in the last 2 or 3 years. They keep making these allegations, but keep giving business to the same group. Now, SEBI is already carrying out its investigation, but when they specifically mention shell companies, I'm sorry, the only shell company involvement, a clear case that I know of, involves the National Herald case where Rahul Gandhi is out on bail.
Okay. Let me go to Brahma Chalani and then Victor Gao for the final word. Brahma Chalani, just in terms of, there are clearly competing sort of approaches to the China question. India is saying that, look, you have to resolve this boundary issue, especially this attempt to change the status quo. Unless we go back to pre-2020 status quo ante as it existed, we can't discuss other areas of the relationship. China is saying, let's leave the border aside. Let's keep that in cold storage for now. Let's discuss the other issues. How do you, come to terms with the fact that the BJP government is saying, resolve the border first, everything else later, and yet our trade with China is at the highest that it's ever been?
You're absolutely right. First, I think that Xi Jinping made a serious strategic miscalculation by launching the border aggression against India in April 2020. He's actually making a permanent enemy of India, which is not in China's long-term interest. India is more determined than ever to forestall the rise of a Sino-centric Asia. The second miscalculation that he made was that he did not anticipate a robust Indian military response to the Chinese aggression. India has locked horns with China militarily in a way no other country has done, not even the United States. For more than 33 months, India has been locked in military standoffs with China. And that has come as a big surprise, a shock to the Chinese leadership, that India seems determined to persist in this confrontation until and unless status quo ante is restored in Ladakh. So given these realities and given India's determination, I think this confrontation will continue. It'll continue until such time the Chinese leadership realizes that it's its own interest of China to make peace with India.
Okay.
Because making a permanent enemy of India means that China can never become the dominant power in Asia.
Okay, I'll give the final word to Professor Victor Gao. Just look at, the geopolitical situation. This week, we're going to be marking the one-year anniversary of this Russia-Ukraine war. I think all of us can agree that the immediate sort of attack exactly a year ago on the 24th of February was launched by Russia. You can go into the merits or demerits of why Putin launched that attack, but it is a fact that Putin is the one who launched that attack. And today, in a speech to the National Parliament there, he said that, it was the West that provoked the attack, so on and so forth. But how do you expect any country, leave alone India, any neutral country, to side with what is seemingly now a growing Sino-Russian alliance of sorts? Today, right now, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that days after Biden went to Ukraine, Mr. Xi Jinping is planning to go to Russia.
First of all, I'm very much pleased to see that India has maintained a very robust and close relations with Russia, especially in terms of trade, especially focusing on oil, etc. And this is against a tremendous amount of pressure from the United States and Western countries in general. And this actually illustrates the independence of foreign policy of India, which is decided by the Indian government and the Indian people. To that extent, I actually give high compliment to the Indians' independence of foreign policy.
It's interesting you say that, Professor Gao. Sorry, I'm interrupting again. It's interesting you say that because the Chinese narrative has always been, though, you Indians you're in the American camp, you're in the American camp. So I'm glad you're saying that now.
Well, the striking thing about India is that it does have a very strong tradition of independence and non-aligned tradition of foreign policy. Okay. And I think this is the true value of India as it is. And in the war in Ukraine, India illustrated its independence very eloquently and has won the compliment of many countries, including China. Now, secondly, when you talk about the war in Ukraine, it is not a war between Russia and the Ukraine. It is, in its real essence, a war between Russia on the one hand and the United States and NATO using Ukraine as their surrogate. It is the new type of war. It's the surrogate war. It's the proxy war that we are talking about.
Okay.
And if anyone believes that they can defeat Russia in Ukraine, forcing Russia into the corner, I think they probably commit the biggest geopolitical blunder in their own judgment to their own detriment.
I got to wrap up. I'm completely out of time. Thank you very much, though, to Tuhin Sinha, Supriya Srinath, Smita Prakash, Brahma